Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're really getting into something fundamental. It's a piece of legislation that honestly shapes a huge part of the economy here in South Africa.
That's right. We're talking about the Petroleum Products Act, number 120 of 1977.
1977? That sounds quite old, doesn't it?
It does, yeah. Assented way back in July 77. But here's the thing. It's not some dusty old law sitting on a shelf.
Okay.
It's been constantly tweaked, updated right up to August 2024. Just reviewed again, March this year?
So it's very much a living law.
Absolutely. It's dynamic. It dictates, well, everything from the price you actually pay at the pump to national energy strategy and even social transformation goals. It's got real teeth.
So our mission today is to unpack that, understand its sort of dual personality, its history and energy security, and how it became this powerful economic lever for, well, quite significant social change.
We need to get a handle on the legal power it grants, the market structures it enforces, and why all these details matter to, you, the person listening, every single day.
Right. Let's start at the beginning then. The original goals back in 77, what was the focus?
Well, think about the time. Global oil crises. The main drivers were pretty straightforward. Measures for saving petroleum products.
Okay, conservation.
Exactly. And economy and the cost of distribution, making it cheaper to move fuel around. And, crucially, maintaining and controlling a price.
So security and stability. Pretty standard for the era.
Very much so. But then came the amendments, especially around the early 2000s. And the purpose shifted quite dramatically.
How so?
The Modern Act now explicitly talks about licensing people involved in making and selling fuel. That's new. And here's the big one. It mandates promoting the transformation of the South African petroleum and liquid fuels industry.
Transformation, that's a key term.
Huge. It moved the act from just managing supply to actively reshaping the industry along socioeconomic lines. A massive expansion of what the state was trying to achieve with this law.
So before we go further, let's pin down the basics. What exactly counts as a petroleum product under this act? Is it just petrol and diesel?
Oh, it's much broader than that. The definition includes pretty much any petroleum fuel or lubricant, used or unused.
Lubricant too. Interesting.
Yeah, and even any other substance that could be used for the same purpose. So basically, if it gets your car moving, keeps machinery running, or heats your home, this act likely covers it.
Okay, broad scope. And you mentioned licenses. What are the main types?
There are essentially 4 core ones, all issued by the Controller of Petroleum Products. A manufacturing license, a wholesale license, a site license that's for holding or developing the land for a station, and a retail license.
And the difference between wholesale and retail seems important here.
Absolutely critical for understanding how the market's structured. Wholesale means buying and selling in bulk. You're selling either to another licensed wholesaler or manufacturer, or to a licensed retailer.
Right.
Or directly to an end user, and this is key only for that user's own consumption. Think like a big factory or a trucking company buying fuel directly.
Got it. And retail?
Retail is what you see every day. Selling fuel to an end consumer, like you or me, at a site, which is just the legal term for the premises, the filling station that's zoned for it.
Okay, that makes sense. Now, let's get to the real power center, the minister's role. Section 2, right? This sounds like where the government really steps in.
It absolutely is.
Yeah.
As of August 2024, these powers rest with the Minister of Mineral and Petroleum Resources. And sweeping is probably an understatement.
Okay, give us some examples.
Well, Section 2(1)(a) and B, the minister can regulate or even outright prohibit almost anything to do with fuel. The use, purchase, sale, supply, storage, transport, even the recovery and re-refining of used oil.
Wow, that's comprehensive control over the physical product.
And it's justified in the acts for ensuring economy of distribution or managing supply in a crisis. They can also control where fuel outlets pop up.
How does that work?
They can regulate or prohibit the establishment or creation of a new outlet, like a petrol station. They can even stop an existing business from changing its fuel supplier if it impacts that distribution economy goal.
So they control the map, essentially, where stations go and who supplies them.
Pretty much. And then, of course, the power everyone feels most directly, price control. Section 2(1)(c).
The big one.
The minister can literally prescribe the price for any petroleum product, or set a maximum price or a minimum price.
So they're not just influencing it, they can dictate the exact rand and cents figure.
Potentially, yes.
Yeah.
This gives them enormous leverage over the entire sector's profitability and structure. It's not just about the cap on petrol. It affects margins all the way down the line.
But hang on, you mentioned earlier the Act now pushes for transformation, helping new players get in. If the minister sets prices, maybe even low prices to help consumers, couldn't that squeeze margins and make it harder for those new entrants, the historically disadvantaged South Africans, to actually build a business?
That is precisely the core tension within the Act. It's a constant balancing act.
How do they manage it?
They have to try and set prices that are, affordable or competitive for the public, but also allow enough margin in the system to support investment and, crucially, to facilitate those social transformation objectives.
That sounds incredibly difficult.
It is. And to make sure the price sticks, Section 2.1 gives the minister power to regulate or ban any business practice, deal, or scheme that's designed to sneakily influence or hike up the price. It's like an anti-avoidance rule for the regulated price.
Okay, so the minister sets the price, controls the supply chain. How does the Act ensure the market itself is structured to actually deliver on this? That brings us back to licensing, doesn't it?
Exactly. Licensing under Section 2A is the key mechanism for enforcing both the market structure and the transformation goals.
What's the basic rule?
Very simple. You want to manufacture fuel, you need a license. Wholesale it. License. Hold and develop a site for a station. License. Retail fuel. License. Do any of these specific activities without the right piece of paper from the controller, you'll get a notice telling you to stop immediately.
So licenses are the gatekeepers, and do they impose rules on how licensed players interact?
Yes, definitely. Some key structural rules. For instance, a licensed manufacturer can generally only sell their product to a licensed wholesaler or a licensed retailer.
Unless they're exporting, I assume.
Right, export is the exception. But domestically, it creates this closed loop, ensuring everyone in the chain is playing by the rules and is accountable.
What about vertical integration? Can a big wholesaler also own the petrol stations?
Good question. Section 2A7 puts a major block on that. A licensed wholesaler is generally prohibited from holding a retail license.
Why is that?
The thinking is to prevent the big bulk suppliers from dominating the retail space and potentially squeezing out independent retailers. It promotes fairness in access to supply. There's a small exception for training purposes, but the principle is separation.
That makes sense from a competition perspective. I noticed a smaller detail in that section too, the bit about self-service.
Yes. Section 2A6. It explicitly prohibits consumers from serving themselves prescribed petroleum products at a licensed retail site.
So no pumping your own petrol. Why is that rule there? It seems specific.
It's incredibly specific, and it's not really about safety or efficiency in the modern context. It's widely understood as a job preservation measure.
Really?
Yes. By banning self-service, the Act effectively mandates the role of the fuel attendant. It embeds job creation right into the operational law of the industry. Social policy through operational rules.
That's fascinating. Okay, let's talk more about that social policy aspect transformation. Section 2B and 2C. How does the Act ensure this happens?
Well, it's not optional. When the controller considers issuing a license, they must actively promote certain objectives. Top of the list, the advancement of historically disadvantaged South Africans.
Which means?
Those groups previously excluded under apartheid. And the controller must also give effect to the charter.
The charter being?
That's Schedule 1 of the Act. It lays out a specific framework for empowering historically disadvantaged South Africans within this particular industry. So transformation isn't just a vague goal. It's tied to specific legal requirements and frameworks when licenses are issued or renewed.
But it can't just be about transformation, surely. What about keeping the industry running smoothly?
No, you're right. It's balanced. The controller also has to consider other things: promoting an efficient industry, facilitating commercially justifiable investment, creating jobs and small businesses generally, and making sure fuel is available countrywide at competitive prices.
So it's this complex equation.
Yeah.
Social reform plus economic efficiency plus investment plus job creation.
Exactly. A very tough balancing act baked into the licensing process itself.
And is this focus on social outcomes even stronger anywhere else in the Act?
Yes, definitely. When you look at LPG, liquefied petroleum gas and paraffin, sections 2E and 2F, there's a general system for allocating site and retail licenses for petrol and diesel, aiming for an optimum number of efficient sites over time.
Okay.
But for LPG and paraffin, the system the minister prescribes must be specifically targeted at poverty alleviation for low-income households.
Wow. So the license to sell cooking gas is directly linked to fighting poverty.
Explicitly. It's
Yeah.
quite remarkable. The act even allows the minister, in certain designated areas, to restrict the retail of LPG or paraffin to just one or maybe a few specific retailers.
Why would they do that?
It could be a tool for focused distribution in vulnerable communities, ensuring supply or maybe supporting specific community-based retailers as part of that poverty alleviation goal. It's a powerful social lever.
Okay, so the rules are complex, the goals are ambitious. What happens if someone breaks these rules? Let's talk enforcement.
All right, Section 3 covers the enforcers. The minister appoints the controller of petroleum products, who handles the licensing, and also inspectors.
And what can these inspectors do?
Their job is to assist the minister, gather info, and investigate potential offenses under the Act. And their powers can be quite significant.
How significant?
If regulations grant them the power, inspectors can enter and search premises that includes vehicles, ships, even aircraft, and seize petroleum products without needing a warrant.
Without a warrant, that's unusual, isn't it?
It is, and it really underscores how critical the state views control over these products.
Right.
Probably linking back to those original security concerns, but also protecting the regulated market structure now.
And the penalties if you're caught doing something wrong.
They are severe. Section 12. Contravention can lead to a conviction with a fine up to 1 million rand.
1 million.
Yes, or imprisonment for up to 10 years, or potentially both. That's a massive deterrent.
It certainly sends a message. Is there any way out if you're accused?
Well, there's a provision that if the controller issues a directive, say, telling you to stop an unlawful activity, and you comply immediately, that compliance can absolve you from criminal liability for that specific act. It encourages quick correction.
Okay, that's state enforcement. What about disputes within the industry? Say, a small retailer feels squeezed by a big supplier.
The Act actually provides mechanisms for that, too. First, Section 12A allows anyone directly affected by a controller's decision, like being denied a license, to appeal directly to the minister within 60 days.
So an internal appeal route.
Yes. And then, perhaps even more interestingly, Section 12B tackles those disputes between players. The controller can actually require licensed retailers and wholesalers to submit disputes about unfair or unreasonable contractual practices to arbitration.
Arbitration, so not the courts.
Exactly. It's a dedicated, potentially faster mechanism built right into the Act. If a small retailer feels a big wholesaler is playing unfairly, the controller can push them into binding arbitration.
And the arbitrator's decision.
It's final and binding. It's a powerful tool designed to protect smaller players within this tightly regulated system.
Wow. Okay, reflecting on this whole thing. It's quite the journey, isn't it? We started back in 1977 with a law basically trying to keep the lights on and fuel available.
And we've ended up with this incredibly complex piece of modern legislation that's driving social transformation, micromanaging market structure through licensing, setting prices.
And even setting up special dispute resolution systems between businesses. It's far more than just a Petroleum Products Act.
It really is unique. It shows how law can evolve to carry these heavy, sometimes conflicting burdens, balancing core economic needs like price control and efficiency with really ambitious social goals like transformation and targeted poverty reduction via fuel like LPG.
So as we wrap up, maybe a final thought for our listeners to chew on looking ahead.
Well, think about this. The Act, in its definitions and the minister's powers, explicitly covers petroleum products made from coal, natural gas, or even vegetable matter, not just crude oil.
Right, that was in the definitions.
So, given all the pressure now to move away from traditional fossil fuels towards renewables, maybe greener alternatives, how could the government use these existing, very powerful regulatory tools originally designed for managing oil to actually shape, maybe accelerate, or control the transition to a completely different energy future?
Using old powers for new energy goals. That's definitely something to think about next time you're standing at the pump.
Indeed. It shows just how relevant this seemingly old act might continue to be.